In this video, we go over basic camera settings for video. So if you're a new videographer or a photographer who wants to get into video, check out these instructions. Hit like, subscribe, and tune in. Hey everybody, welcome back to our channel. I'm Yohance, and today we're gonna go over some basic camera settings. But before that happens, I have a special guest.
I'm Felix, and I've done photography with my mom for quite a few years now, since high school. And I've always helped her and assisted her in weddings and photo shoots, but I've never done anything with videography yet, so.
We're gonna go over some basic camera settings. I think not only that is gonna help you, but also help anybody who's watching currently. You know, there's a lot of YouTubers that do a lot of rambling. I just wanna jump right into it, okay? I'm not here to waste your time, all right? We're gonna go into the menu system, and one of the first things we wanna adjust for video is our frame rate. And hit the menu, and then go right up here to movie record quality. Here we have full FHD, which is 1080p at 60 frames per second. And you can even do 4K. 4K 60 is nice. Gives you a lot of room to play in post. You want to decide, do you want your viewer to be immersed in something epic, something slow motion? A lot of people see slow motion video as being cinematic. Do we want to shoot at 120 frames per second? You get that buttery, smooth motion, as you can see right now on the screen. Or do you want to do 60 frames per second, which you could also slow it down for slow motion as well, just not quite as much as you can with 120 frames per second. You can shoot at 30 frames per second. A lot of people like that for YouTube, like we're here right now. Or a lot of people like to shoot at 24 frames per second. A lot of the movies that you watch in the cinema or at home, a lot of them are produced at 24 frames per second. But here at our company and when we shoot weddings, we like to shoot at 60 frames per second. Because what that does is that allows us in editing or in post to slow it down. It just gives us more flexibility, okay? 120 frames per second, whilst it is beautiful, it uses up a lot of memory. We want to be careful with that. So the next setting I would like to cover is aperture. If you want those nice blurry backgrounds, depth of field from a foreground element, for instance, you will pay attention to your aperture. Typically for movies, people shoot at like f2.8. 2.8 allows you to get the eyes in focus, depending on what distance you are from your subject, whilst giving you a beautiful bokeh, or bokeh, however you say it. How do you say it? Do you say bokeh or bokeh?
Bouquet.
Bokeh, okay, so you say it the right way. I need to learn from you. Okay, so it's bokeh. What I do on the back of my camera here is on the LCD screen, go to the bottom. On Canon, I like to use the touch screen, and I can dial in my f-stop here. I like to stay at 2.8. You also can use the dial on the back of the camera to adjust your f-stop, depending on what settings you've chosen when you set up your camera. For me, I have mine right here on this dial. And you can adjust your aperture. Now, if you close down your aperture, let's say you went to f5.6, it actually optimizes the visual quality of most lenses. But like I said, in video, if you stick to right around 2.8, you're doing pretty good. A lot of Hollywood films are shot at f2.8. I know that number is smaller, so you think you're closing down your aperture, but when that number is smaller at f2.8, it actually opens up your aperture. The aperture are those blades on the inside of the lens. You know, it kind of opens up and closes down. If you keep it there around f2.8 throughout your wedding day, I think you're doing pretty good.
Can you change your aperture in the middle of recording, or?
So you would stop your recording, go back to your settings, and adjust it to where you want it to be. If you are shooting a wedding or something, I wouldn't recommend stopping recording to adjust that, because you may miss that special kiss or something like that. So I would wait till after, you know, something significant, making sure that you don't miss anything important before you go ahead and adjust that.
Can I still use the Nikon D300 that I have, or would I have to buy entirely new equipment to get into videography?
What year did that camera come out?
2008.
Throw it out. No, no, I'm joking. The camera you have is the best equipment that you can use. Because even if you have a cell phone, for instance, I'm reading the script off of the cell phone here, like a cell phone like this. If you have a cell phone, even that works, okay? A lot of modern cell phones have a professional setting buried deep where you can adjust your aperture, your shutter speed and stuff in video and photography. But in the case of your camera, without knowing all of the settings off the top of my head and how the Nikon's work. I'm almost quite sure that, that even a camera like that would have video settings. I would not go out and splurge and spend a whole bunch of money on something that's a hobby or doesn't pay you currently. I would be very careful with that because these things get expensive. This lens is $3,000. The camera itself is $2,200. You know, so we're looking at a setup here that's almost $5,000. The only reason I have a setup like this is because I make money off of this stuff, right? But when I started out, my camera cost me $400, my first camera. And the first lens I got with it was a kit lens that came in the box, which was worth like $100. And before that, I used my cell phone. So whatever you have available, I would say start with that, okay? And who knows, you might get bitten by the camera bug. That's what happened to me. I became obsessed with it. More than happy to help you guys out and help you out and get started in videography. With that being said, let's get right into our ISO setting. Felix, do you know what ISO is?
Not technically, but I know that I adjust it a lot depending on if you're inside or outside and what the lighting is.
Well, the interesting thing is in video, you actually adjust it less because a lot of cameras, especially if we're shooting in log or we're shooting in some raw settings, depending on your camera, you may have to leave your ISO or ISO in one spot. For instance, with the Sony FX3, which this video is being shot on, the native ISO range is 800 or 12,800, depending on your setting in the camera and how much flexibility you want in post. You may not even be able to shift or move your ISO or ISO. So with the Canon camera that we have right here on log 3, the Canon R6 log 3, the native ISO would be, or ISO would be 800. You can adjust it if you feel like you need to, but if you want to have a nice flat profile that allows you to color grade and do all the fancy smanchy stuff, I would keep it at whatever setting that your camera prefers. Right here on the back of the LCD screen, there is an ISO setting. You can go ahead and tap on that. That's why I love modern cameras. I mean, you can't beat this touch screen here, man. I know you film people love your film cameras, but hey, it's not the 1800s anymore. For Canon cameras, 800 is the native ISO. This video is being shot on a Sony FX3 because we don't have brand loyalty around here. We use the best stuff that we can use. So I believe when you're shooting log on a Sony FX3, you can't even change the ISO, depending on what settings you have. But in Canon, you can, because Canon is superior to Sony. Tell us what you like more. You like Sony or you like Canon? What do you prefer? But anyway, we use both. ISO is actually your camera's ability to raise the exposure in camera. And if you raise your ISO too much, you may introduce a lot of grain because the camera really struggles on a digital level to introduce light into your frame or your video. So the next and final setting we're gonna cover today is our shutter speed. There's a little, almost like a window over your sensor in the back of your camera that opens and closes and lets more light into the camera, which of course changes your exposure. In videography specifically, we like to have our shutter speed double what our frame rate is. So if our frame rate is 60 frames per second, like we like to do at our company, your shutter speed is going to be at
1/125.
They've got it. So on Canon, you can go right here and adjust your shutter speed. If we like to shoot at 60 frames per second, we would go to shutter speed 1/125. And we don't do 1/120 because on Canon, you can't necessarily adjust to 1/120. If for whatever reason, because of your ambient exposure in the environment, you need to up your shutter speed to, let's say, 1/300, 1/400, then you can do that and you'd be fine. It would not be optimal for our drag that we mentioned, but 1/125 is fine. We can go up. Definitely don't go down. If your frame rate is 1/60, don't drop to 1/40. Don't drop to 1/30. Stay at 1/125 or go up. There's a certain level of drag or sort of motion blur that happens depending on your shutter speed. If you have a slower shutter speed, then there's more of a drag when your subject moves. That may work well if you were trying to show something that's super dramatic. Like, for instance, I was once recording a commercial for a bar, and to simulate the effect of being drunk, I slowed my shutter speed down to 1/15. And so when everybody moved, there was like a drag behind them. Because you know, if you drink, that's how you kind of feel like you're, you know, that kind of thing. But if you're shooting sports, you may want to have a higher shutter speed, in photography that is. You may want to have a higher shutter speed so that you freeze the motion. Video, like I said, works a little bit differently, and you want a sort of pleasing drag to the motion. Rule of thumb is shutter speed is double the frame rate. So until the next one, everybody, thank you for joining us. Tune in for more tutorials for beginning videographers. Take care.